A note to listeners, the following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences.
I met Larry and Roy at the park one day. I was waiting on my friends. I was 13, waiting on some friends. They approached me and wanted to take pictures of me, wanted me to come back to their motel, and I refused because I was waiting for my friends. Plus, they were older. I wasn't going anywhere with them.
There was a tape made of the rape of Jackie Gilliam, who was their third victim. This is one of the tapes that was buried, but we know it existed because of witnesses, DENA and other teenagers who we played the tape for. And that is the tape that DENA heard was the rape of Jackie Gilliam that was never recovered.
So that's the part that really haunts me, is knowing that I drove around in that van.
Why?
Because he did those horrible things in that van, and then you put me in the van. Like, it was no big deal what he did to those girls. Then you put other people in there.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
Today we have a very interesting guest on the podcast. DENA Moody is a survivor of the Toolbox killers, Laurence BITTAKER and Roy Norris. Between the two of them, they were found guilty of 5 murders of young girls in the 1980s. But based on Laura's research, she has been able to find evidence of more victims.
Laura discovered DENA Moody after Laurence BITTAKER handed over all of his discovery evidence for his defense trial. Laura went through mountains of documents, and when she found DENA's name in police reports, she knew she had to contact her to find out more about BITTAKER and Norris.
The big question we all have is, why didn't BITTAKER and Norris kill DENA? And what has it been like for her all of these years knowing that she cheated death? Today we're going to be speaking with a really special guest, and we're really excited to have her. Her name is DENA Moody, and we're really, really excited to have her on the show. So DENA, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm DENA Moody. I am 57 years old. I am a survivor from Larry BITTAKER and Roy Norris, and I am here to talk about my crazy adventure and the girls we need to find.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, there she is. We just did her little interview. Okay. Can you hear us, Laura?
Oh, I can hear you guys fine.
Great.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Okay, so we just did like a little intro to DENA, and she explained to us she was one of the survivors of Laurence BITTAKER and Norris, and she's going to kind of give us landscape of her life when that happened, and tell us a little bit about herself. So DENA, why don't you just give us a little bit of background, where you're from and what life was like for you back then when you were younger, and how you came in contact with these two people, and give us the thumbnail sketch of what happened.
Okay. I was born in Georgia. My mother moved us to California for her job when I was approximately 13. I had a good life. My mother loved me. I had brothers. I had no issues at home. I was kind of a brat, but that was spoiledness. I met Larry and Roy at the park one day. I was waiting on my friends. I was 13, waiting on some friends. They approached me and wanted to take pictures of me, wanted me to come back to their motel, and I refused because I was waiting for my friends. Plus, they were older. I wasn't going anywhere with them. When my friends got there, I explained who they were, and we actually went over there because one of the male friends knew them, and I was introduced to them that way. Plus, my other friend was staying in the same motel with them, so we had mutual friends.
And just let's give people a little bit of a background of the time period, because this was in the late 70s in Los Angeles area, where life was very loose at the time, where people left the doors unlocked and people could walk from Burbank to Glendale without blinking an eye. It was a very different time period. So tell us a little bit about that, what it was like. And
we walked everywhere. We had no fear. We hung out in the park. After dark, we walked back and forth to school every day. I walked through the mall in Glendale after school every day to go to my mother's work to help to work there with her. There was no fear. We trusted people. We hitchhiked to the beach. It was no fear.
When did you meet him? What year was it?
Oh, I was 13 years old, 14 almost. I was 14 almost.
Probably around 1980.
No, it was 1979.
Oh, 79, 80.
Yeah.
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 It's hard to hear you, Laura. What did you say?
It was hard to hear.
It was at 1979 they approached her, but it was at McCambridge Park in Burbank, and they used that model ruse. That was like one of their known ruses, like, we're a model scout, we took your picture, we think you could be a model.
So after they approached you, Dena, what happened then?
I refused to go with them back to their motel where they wanted me to go, and waited for my friends to show up. When they took a bunch of pictures of me while they were there. I remember I had a white dress on, and they took a bunch of pictures because everybody wants to go to Hollywood and be a model, you know, especially a naive Southern girl at 13 years old. But I waited for my friends, thank God, and then we went over there because they had already met Larry, one of the male friends. And then it just would go over there and party because they would buy us beer, and we just hung out with them. And Larry developed some kind of weird fascination with me. The more I learn about it, the creepier it is, actually. Laura knows a little more than I do.
Well, I had asked BITTAKER when I met with him. This is even 2 years before I tracked Dena down, and I would always ask him, like, why didn't you hurt any of the girls at the motel? And he's like, well, they knew me, so it was like a lead back to him if the cops ever got involved. And I said, is there any that you would have taken as a victim? And he said, he was like, Dena was so beautiful, I would have taken Dena. And this was, I think, 2018 when he told me this, and then I found Dena in 2020.
And why do you think he didn't take you, Dena?
I think I never showed any fear to Larry. He pulled a gun on me. He showed pictures, video, and I always yelled at him and told him to put it away. I showed no fear. I don't know if that's the reason, or I had a guardian angel. I don't know. I still wonder that to this day because I never was afraid of him. He never gave me any reason to. I didn't like Roy because he was weird.
What was weird about Roy? What was different about him?
His demeanor, the way he acted, the way he looked at me. I didn't like him right off the bat, and I told Larry that. And then Larry stopped bringing him around as much because I didn't like him and I wouldn't go anywhere with him. I unfortunately rode around in that van with both of them before, but I didn't like Roy because there was something about him I didn't like. But Larry was different. I never showed any fear. He never projected any fear to me. Never. It was very strange because he would show me pictures and showed me stuff he hid under the refrigerator one time, guns and pictures and a tape if he ever never came back. And as a teenager, you don't think about, gosh, what are you doing on the weekends? You killing people? You don't think like that because we're normal. They weren't.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't understand it to this day.
No, it's horrifying to think that you were that close to being a victim of this monster. I can't even imagine what that must have been like for you at all. How did you find out that there was when was the first time that you found out that he was doing the things that he was doing?
When the FBI come knocking on the door.
And how long had you known him at that point?
Probably a year. Yeah, a year, because I turned 15 and he got angry because my friends gave me a birthday party at another friend's house. He wasn't invited, and he got angry with me because he was going to give me jewelry and put me up in a condo and all this kind of stuff. And I told him he was crazy because I was, 15 years old, and he, like, you can't come around here for a week. And I'm like, well, whatever. He thought he could tell me what to do. And it was very strange.
How old was he at the time?
34, I think.
No, 38, actually.
38.
So he was 38 years old, and he was hanging around with you, actually, you were 14 when you met him. So he was a 38-year-old man hanging around a 14-year-old girl.
Yeah, with a bunch of other teenagers with me.
What did they say about him?
They have a lot of mental problems to this day, and it's caused them a lot of issues. It's, a lot more than me, but it's unbelievable when you think about it, and that you rode in this van of those horrible things that they did. And that's what'll get you if you sit and think about it for very long. And they just can't handle it right now.
Are you in contact with any of them still?
Yes, I am. But mentally, they don't want any part of it at this point.
Oh, I understand.
But I made a promise to myself and to Laura that I would help because it could have been me, it should have been me, and these girls deserve our respect.
Well, it's very, very wonderful that you're open to doing that because I agree with you. I think any information that when you're talking about these things and you're going over it over and over again, there's always a piece of information that can come out later that maybe you didn't think was important before that can help try to solve some of these things.
What was the single most thing that he did that kind of brought these girls into his fold? I mean, was he charismatic? Were they both charismatic? And I know they talked about, he wanted to set you up with an apartment and do stuff, but how did he entice these women?
By giving them weed and letting them have a place to hang out when they're that young. I mean, if you smoke pot or drink, it was the perfect place to go because he didn't care. It was almost like it was a cover now that we see, but then we didn't care. It was just a laid back time and everybody got high with everybody and we didn't think about anything sexually like that. I didn't. I was a virgin. I didn't think about anything like that.
And it was like it was your first time where an adult was actually acting cool with you and letting you do things that an adult would do.
Yes.
So it made you
in the model, angle. He always wanted to take pictures and everybody wants to, be a model. Like I said, when you go to California, especially from the South.
So a lot of the teenagers would hang out in front of that liquor store, and Larry would always say, "Come back to my place, have some free grass, have some drinks." And it became the Burbank hangout spot for teenagers.
I mean, it makes sense. He used what he knew would lure them in. I mean, he was the party guy. So, I mean, we knew people like that in the 80s and the 90s. There was always like this 25-year-old guy or whatever. You didn't really think about it. You were like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. We're just going to go hang out with them.
Exactly.
It was the perfect cover for that time.
Yeah.
Because people in their right mind don't think like that, like they did.
Exactly. Okay, so then it sounds to me, and maybe I'm wrong, that he had a connection with you and had feelings for you. And maybe that's why he didn't do the things he did to these other girls.
I always thought that because he offered me jewelry and rings and put me up in a condo, and when I told him, like, he played a tape one time of a girl screaming, and I yelled at him and told him to turn it off. He said it was some girl having sex for the first time, but it sure didn't sound like it to me, and I didn't want to hear it, and he turned it off. So sometimes I wonder if he had feelings or if he was capable of that, or if he was grooming me or something, because I had no fear. Now, that I'm older, I don't know.
Grooming you for
Maybe
what?
Laura knew. She talked to him.
She was played, by the way, for the people who are picking up or new to this case. There was a tape made of the rape of Jackie Gilliam, who was their third victim. This is one of the tapes that was buried, but we know it existed because of witnesses, DENA and other teenagers who he played the tape for. And that is the tape that DENA heard was the rape of Jackie Gilliam that was never recovered.
Wow. Yeah, Laura's told me that before. It's so shocking. You can't even believe it when you're listening to these stories, because it's like, here's a 14-year-old girl, you, DENA, hanging out with this guy that all your friends are hanging out with because he's giving you weed and he's giving you alcohol. You're not thinking anything. And he plays a tape for you of a woman screaming, and it's a woman that he's murdered.
Yeah, he thought it was cool because he said it was first time and he had a big penis and that's why it was hurting. I'm like, I don't want any part of it if that's what sex is about, but I think you're lying. And he turned it off. But I never saw evil in his eyes like you do some people. You can see evil, but I never saw it in Larry, and I never felt it, is the strange thing. I felt it with Roy, but not with Larry. The FBI came knocking on the door. I was at a lady's house in Hollywood. I don't even know how they found me, but they took me down without my mother's permission, and that's probably why the tape's been buried or whatever, a lot of the pictures, because they had bags of pictures that I was looking at, and then my mother got there and took me out. That's why I didn't testify because the defense actually subpoenaed me, and when I got there, my mother asked them if they really wanted me on the stand because I had nothing that was going to help them, but they let me go.
When they first questioned you, what did they say to you? Like, I can't even imagine.
I knew Larry and Roy, and I'm like, yes. And they said, well, you need to come with us. And they told me on the way down there that they were in custody for serial killing of young girls, and they wanted me to look at some pictures and stuff, and I did. And it just was like a dream. It was like it wasn't happening, because things like that don't really happen, you know?
I'm sure it was, like you're saying, like a nightmare. Like, how is this real?
Yeah, it just, and then you block it out for so long, and then Miss Laura comes in and
None of the minors were called to testify, and none of their names were released, in the papers. So what happened was, when Bittaker had given me the police discovery, suddenly I had all the minors' names who have, they were locked up and, put on a shelf in this for the police discovery and never to be seen again. So now I had all these witnesses and all these minors who I tracked back, 40 years later. And Dina was one of them. And probably the most I found out about this case was from these teenage witnesses who were there.
For you, Laura, what was that like? Because here you are building some kind of a relationship with this person in order to understand why he did the things he did. And now here you're looking at all of these young girls, teenagers, that he was luring into this trap. What did you think about this with Dina? Why do you think he didn't kill her?
What Dina said about the fear, I think, could be definitely a factor, because, I always say, if you want to defeat a sadist, starve a sadist, and their food is fear. If she's not showing fear, she's not going to be a good victim for them. They want the girls screaming. That's what got them off. So that could have played a definite factor. And then he might have just gotten too close to Dina. She wasn't a surrogate anymore. She wasn't a nameless person that he could just torture. He had a relationship with her at this point. But Dina told me something that really is a huge factor. And I think you said that earlier, Cindy, how one person can come forward and say something, but nobody's put the pieces together until now. Dina, remember how you had told me that he had all the guns and the tapes under the fridge?
Uh-huh.
How many tapes do you remember seeing under that fridge?
2.
What's interesting about this, when Dina told me that, which Dina doesn't realize, and nobody has ever put these pieces together, is the Lynette tape did not exist at this time. That was always kept in the van. It was never brought into the motel room. And that was made about almost 2 months after the Gilliam tape was made too. So the Lynette tape could not have been under that fridge. There's another witness on the case. Dina, you're friends with her. I'll tell you her name afterward. And she said she had heard a second tape outside of the Gilliam tape. And how she describes the tape is it would click on and you would hear a girl screaming. And I mean screaming for her life. And then it would click off. And then it would click back on and you would hear another girl screaming. And she said she heard 12 to 13 girls screaming, clicking off, clicking on that tape. And nobody has found this tape. This is another one of the buried tapes. I've just called it the scream tape. But who are these 12 to 13 girls that she heard on this tape? And then when Dina told me, she was like, I saw 2 tapes under that fridge. This shows me this tape could really exist. It's buried somewhere with the Gilliam tape.
For the audience who may not know about Bittaker's MO, let's just talk a little bit about the tapes and what he would do and why he recorded these girls and what was the motivation behind that.
Bittaker and Norris were sadists, which means they derive pleasure from, any type of torture. It could be psychological, could be sexual, could be physical. Bittaker and Norris did all 3. They would take the girls and they would use tools. It's how they got the moniker, the Toolbox Killer, to torture them in their van up in the mountains. And they would record it. They would record the rape, the torture, and even the killings, and take Polaroids of the girls as well.
So this other victim, or witness, who could have been a victim as well, like Dina, she heard a tape where there's 12 to 13 different girls. So that could mean that there's 12 to 13 victims that we don't know about.
Correct.
Yeah, because he had bags of photos when the FBI took me down. Paper bags. I don't know how many girls.
I think it was over 500 photographs they recovered. They were all recovered from Norris's place in Redondo Beach. What happened was they had, arrested Norris first. They didn't have a location for Bittaker because Bittaker was living at the motel off grid. So what happened was when they went in to arrest Norris, they found a business card that said the Scott Motel. That's when Bynum from the Hermosa Police Department, the one who pulled himself over the case, he called over to Burbank and they went over to the Scott Motel and got him. But just so happens Bittaker had just called Norris's place, and Jim, who was Norris's parole officer, was there and picked up the phone and said he's next door at his sister's place fixing an antenna. And Larry knew this wasn't true, so he got tipped off the cops were coming. This is how, he was able to bury all the evidence before they got there.
Wow. I think you're very brave, Dina, to talk about this stuff, because as a teen girl, we are not equipped to handle anything like this. We're not built for that. We're still developing our brains, our souls, our hearts, we're thinking about having a good time with our friends and hanging out and what we're going to do, this weekend. We're not thinking about these heavy things that you witnessed. And, even though you didn't witness the murders, you were hanging around the person who was doing these horrific things. So psychologically, it must have been very, very, very difficult for you after you learned that this person that you were hanging out with was capable of doing these things. So what did you think when the FBI came after you were talking to them? Did you start to think about, oh, this could happen to me, or there's other pieces?
No, not really. Still didn't have that. I mean, it felt like a dream, but then as a teenager, I guess you block it out. I didn't really freak out. My mom was freaking out, of course, but it didn't freak me out that much until I got older and had children. And then you think about that. It could have been me and I wouldn't have these children. But as a teenager, I guess and maybe that's why I did so many drugs as a teenager after Larry, was to block it out. I don't know. But I blocked it out basically for years and years, unless my mother would bring it up and I'd say, yeah, or I'd hear it on Criminal Minds or something. And I'm like, yeah, those are the ones I knew. But it just shocked me so much because I never saw that side of Larry. It wouldn't have surprised me if it had been Roy, but it shocked me that it was Larry.
Laura, that's something I want to talk about, because that to me is the most terrifying part of this.
Well, Dena and I have had this conversation before, because she was like, he was so kind to me. And there's been times when BITTAKER was so kind to me. And that's almost harder to wrap your mind around, is like this person who can do the most evil act, and then can turn around and be kind to somebody. And that's what makes, I think, when you're thinking about a serial killer, and you're thinking about like when they're arrested and like everyone's like so surprised, like Dena's saying, I would think it was Roy, but never Larry. It makes it's so much scarier to think like this person who's so nice and can do these kind deeds are the ones, up in the mountains with tools, torturing young girls, babies.
And why do you think, from your experience and your studies and your research, that that's even possible? Is it just pure evil that they can mask or they can compartmentalize? Or is it, I think it's terrifying that these monsters live amongst us like this and we have no warning signs. Like we are guided by our intuition, right? You never had a bad feeling at all, Dena. Nothing like, oh, maybe I shouldn't hang out with this guy. That's always my thing with the kids and with everyone. We always say
it was Roy that gave me the bad feeling and creeped me out. It wasn't Larry. I wrote it out by myself with Larry.
Yeah, Roy was very sexual in his letters and talks with me. Like I always got, like, you could feel Roy. Like Dena, like it was Roy you could feel. It was just like she's saying. And then with Larry, it was like, yeah, you wouldn't know.
Why is that?
I don't know.
Laura, what do you think?
Well, I think Norris was just, Norris was always into the rapes. He was way more sexual, and it's like compulsion. He couldn't control it. I think that's why it like bled into his personality. Where BITTAKER, what makes BITTAKER scary, and why I always say Hannibal Lecter, as I always compare him, is like, he was that methodical. Like he could wear a mask and be totally normal. I mean, he was working as a skilled aircraft mechanic, making the equivalent to $450,000 a year today. I mean, which is nuts. And he's holding this job. And then, he's like, he can still hold a conversation, have people over, be social. And then he's taking the girls up there. So it's like he has that facade, that mask, or the mask of sanity, as they always refer to it. BITTAKER did get mad at me once, and I saw like the serial killer come out of him. And Dena, I think you saw it once when you didn't invite him to your birthday party.
Yeah, he got angry.
Yeah.
Can you describe that, Dena? When you say he got angry, what was it about him that changed? Was it his
changed physically? He wasn't that kind person that I could look at, and I could see it in his eyes. He was but it was more hurt and anger. I mean, he was very angry because he thought that, I don't know if I belong to him, or I really don't know. But yeah, he could flip a switch, but that was really the only time he got angry with me.
What was interesting is, and by the way, he's a 38-year-old man getting angry at her for not inviting him to her 15th birthday party with her teenage friend. I mean, that's insane. But you said to me he would do something. He would ground you and tell the kids, like the teenage kids, you're grounded. Yeah, you can't come around here for a week or 2 weeks or whatever. We just told him basically to, get out of town, and we would go over to the neighbors that we knew, or not even go over there. It didn't really hurt our feelings.
but he thought he was in control.
Isn't that what most of this is about, though, is control? He chose victims that young so he could control them, or at least try to. Didn't sound like he controlled you, Dena, which is probably why you're still with us.
No, he didn't. Thank God.
Yeah.
But he tried. I mean, if I'd have been a different type and took the money, took the jewelry, took the condo, if I'd have had a bad home life, then I would have took it. But I knew my mother would come looking, I never even thought of yes. I'm like, you're old. That's disgusting. I'm 15. Come on, dude.
Well, he went to a mother of a 12-year-old, and this was, the mother was a friend of Roy's. And he said to the mother, I'll give you $10,000 for your 12-year-old daughter if you keep her a virgin until 18, and I can buy her. And it was like, so that's a theme I saw with Dena, with her, is like he wanted to buy these girls.
It's a very similar theme to a lot of these serial killers where they have this fascination with owning and possession and buying women, whether they're prostitutes or whether they're...
I was probably the only virgin that hung out there. And I was Southern, white-skinned. I was totally different. And I was a virgin. Everyone else had boyfriends or this or that. And I don't know if that saved me at some point and the no fear, but it's something that keeps you awake at night sometimes, even though I know it's impossible for him to come after me.
Now, I'm sure. But I think you're right. I think because you were a virgin, and maybe that was the purity of it all, that he wanted to keep you for himself. Maybe, Laura, I don't know.
There is a dirty theme in this case, and it's very, very strange. And it was 2 inmates at death row contacted. This was after he had passed, and they're like, he saw you as pure. And I was like, I don't understand what you mean. He saw me as pure, and I was pregnant, so obviously I was not a virgin. But Dena, you were, and he had a fascination with purity and innocence, it seems like. I think he like deemed women in 2 categories of like pure and unpure.
Yeah, because he didn't really like the girls that had boyfriends. He wasn't as nice to them at all.
Did anyone that you were hanging out with back then, did anyone ever say anything about him, that he gave them the creeps, or there was an incident, or was there any warning signals? Or
not really, other than saying that, they thought he was a jerk at times because he'd try to ground them from the motel, and you're grounded for 2 weeks, don't come around anymore, because they'd say something he didn't like. But he didn't like most of them. My best friend he didn't like, and I think, she had a smart mouth, but she also had a boyfriend, but he was very kind to pregnant women, which is very weird.
That's what I think it is. I think it's that Madonna whore complex of like, here you're pregnant, you're elevated, but if you're having sex, then you're this devil woman, and if you're a virgin, then you're up here again. So
right.
That's it.
Yeah, it's so strange that it's like 2 personalities.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. There were times where I thought it was almost like a split personality. And like you just said with the elevation of the pregnancy, they didn't talk about this on the Toolbox killer, but there was, it wasn't just Tracy who was pregnant. There was another girl pregnant, and he helped her, got her clothes and everything. And for 3 years, BITTAKER wouldn't open up to me. He wouldn't write or talk. And I kept trying and trying. And it wasn't until I got pregnant that he did a 180 switch.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Was he ever diagnosed with schizophrenia or anything like that? Any kind of mental illness? I know he had a high IQ of like 138 or something.
No, like mental illness. He was diagnosed as a sociopath and sadism. Those are the only clinical, affirmative diagnoses that we have. During the younger years, he pretended to be crazy just to get into mental hospitals.
Well, that goes with the whole manipulation.
Right.
And control. So, Dena, you said that I just want to walk through maybe the beginning a little bit so it's clear how you met him and why you ended up driving around in that van that is the infamous van of murder and torture, which has been an urban legend for the past 40 years of don't get into the scary white van.
That really haunts me.
I'm sorry, Dena, say that again?
I said that's the part that really haunts me, is knowing that I drove around in that van.
Why?
Because he did those horrible things in that van, and then you put me in the van. Like, it was no big deal what he did to those girls. Then you put other people in there.
What did the van look like?
I couldn't really tell you. I know there was a couch in there, a bed, some other things, but I've blocked all that out, and I couldn't describe it. I don't think I want to.
No, I understand. Terrifying. And you're so brave, honestly, because this is a really, really tragic thing that happened. and it's important to talk about, because if there are 12 to 13 other victims out there, and we do know that there's two, Cindy and Andrea. So Laura, tell us a little bit about those two. Dena, did you know these two victims or?
No, I did not. I did not know them.
Grandparents in Redondo. She had come from Wisconsin. Andrea had just moved here from Ohio. I mean, these are Midwestern girls, in Redondo Beach who got picked up, but they're known as the first and second victim of theirs. And they were taken 2 weeks apart. They looked like they could have been sisters, and they brought them up to San Gabriel on 2 different fire roads. And that's where they killed them, and they were never recovered. What's interesting about Andrea specifically is Roy was not there during the killing at all. And he was the one supposedly leading them to the bodies. I don't know how he could have led them to Andrea since he wasn't even there when she was killed. And it was in 2018 when I was pregnant that he gave up the exact pinpoints where the 2 girls are. And then he gave me the police discovery, which led further into the investigation where I put all the pieces together about the tapes and, started tracking everybody down. And that's how, I came across Dena.
So Dena, what do you want people to know about what happened to you that maybe can help this or prevent this from happening to other girls?
I think any young girl that moves to California should only trust, a reputable reputation if you want to be a model. And even if you're a party girl, looks are very deceiving, very, very deceiving. And don't trust somebody just because they look good and you want to get high. And I think now this generation's a little smarter or a little more not as naive as we were in the 70s or as relaxed. I think the most important part of this that I want people to take from is there are 2 girls that need to come home. And I feel it's my obligation, because it should have been me, that we bring them home. That is the only reason that I'm doing this, is so that we can bring them home where they need to be.
I agree with you. It's why we're doing this too. I think it's awful for any family to have to endure this pain and then never have a resolution. You never get closure, but you need a resolution. And those
are somebody's children, yes.
Those children should not be left up in the woods like that, like pieces of
like trash. No, they need to come home. I have 2 daughters of my own and a great granddaughter, and they need to be brought home. And yes, this has affected me mentally. I take some pills now because of it, but that's okay. I'll get through it. I got through it by the grace of God, and I want to bring those girls home where they belong. I feel it's an obligation and my duty that I lived and survived through all this, and they didn't. So they need to be home with their mamas or their families.
And Laura, just so we can understand the timeline a little bit, Cindy and Andrea, did they meet Bittaker before Dena or after?
I think it would have been after. Cindy was killed in June, and then Andrea was killed 2 weeks later. It was early July.
And Dena, when did you first meet Larry?
I don't know the exact time. I was 14 and it was warm out. Well, it's always warm in California, so I guess it doesn't matter. Laura, do you have more of an idea?
It would have been, they were only out from January 79, and then they were arrested November 79. So it's actually a tiny window.
So in those 10 months, 11 months,
yeah,
they were on their killing spree. So it'd be great, Dena, if you could kind of describe what Southern California was like as a teenager back then, so people can understand what the lifestyle was like.
It was great. As a teenager, there was no fear. You could walk anywhere, especially in Burbank, Glendale. It was so small. We had McCambridge Park right near us. We walked to school. We talked to everybody. Everybody would hitchhike to the beach, or everybody would pile in one van or go party somewhere. We're not afraid of being out walking, and we would be out till 9 or 10 o'clock at night sometimes at the park, or walking to each other's house. There was no fear. It was great. I loved it as a teenager. Just so laid back,
and you could just hitchhike and stand on the side of the road, stick your thumb out, and someone would stop and pick you up. And normally
it was no big deal. There was no fear.
You weren't thinking that a serial killer would be picking you up.
No, that never crossed our mind. Even though we were living with the Hillside Stranglers, I think they were somewhere around that time, and there was other serial killers, but we never, as teenagers, we don't think about that. We don't watch the news. We don't think about stuff like that. We think we're invincible. I think all teenagers do.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like part of being a teenager. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah,
You do
because
think.
you're just free, right? You know, you're going home at night to a warm bed. You can go out, and especially for me, I was from a small town in Georgia, and then I moved to Burbank. So I was so naive and had never done anything, never even kissed a boy. It was all brand new to me, and it was wonderful because it was so free and relaxed. And, you know, I was developing early, and all I really wanted, I wasn't really interested in sex. I just was interested in my friends, and we would get high.
How old were you when you moved to California?
13, I was almost 14.
So you met Bittaker shortly after you moved.
Yeah, not long. I was 13 when I moved to California. I went to John Muir Middle School. Yeah, it wasn't real long.
And Laura, before Dena had met Bittaker, how many victims had he already killed?
Oh, I mean, that's the unanswered question. There's mentions of upwards of 20 in the police discovery. He admitted to me his first kill was 17, 18. So the exact number has to be investigated more for a while, way before he met Dena.
And he was only prosecuted for 5?
Yeah.
And what about the rest of the victims? So this is where we're at right now, where it's like...
That's where we're at exactly right now. Look, more of these. I have 2 missing persons that fit a description of 2 killings that he's given me, matched by names and cars. I have a very, very detailed murder that happened outside of Knott's Berry Farm. I'm still looking for who the victim could be. Then I have this tape, you know, with the 13 victims, and I do have the buried evidence location, but there's so much more that needs to be investigated. And then the girls search for. It's a rabbit hole of a case that has not been, you know, dived into. They kind of got Norris confessing to 5 murders and was like, okay, case closed, you know, that's it. And everything else just, you know, went into a police file and locked up. I mean, none of this would have come to light unless Bittaker had given me the police discovery.
Right. It's so upsetting to hear that. And I hear it all the time. And don't get me wrong, I have a lot of friends in law enforcement, and I respect law enforcement, and I understand that they don't have the resources to investigate a lot of these cases, and that when they do get someone who confesses to 5 murders, it's enough for a prosecution, and that's what they want. They want to put the guy behind bars. But the victims' families are the ones that really suffer, and it's just devastating. We've dealt with this so many times, and it just breaks my heart to think of these young girls just out there and nobody found them. So for these 2 that we have information for, Laura and Rob and I, we are going to start moving forward with an actual investigation to try to recover those girls. But now hearing that there's these 12 other voices on this horrific tape, that's something else we need to kind of dive into. But Dena, the tape that Dena heard, that was Gilliam, and Gilliam was one of his precious victims, if I'm correct. And if I'm wrong,
Favored Gilliam as like one of his favorites, and she was a virgin too.
But he ended up killing her. And when did he kill her?
He actually held Jackie and Leah the longest for 48 hours approximately, and they were taken Memorial Day weekend, September.
Memorial Day or Labor Day?
Oh, was that Labor Day?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so it would have been Labor Day. Yeah, September 3rd is when they were picked up, and they drove them to the mountains, but it was 48 hours later that they killed them.
And Dena, do you think that you were hanging out with him when school was happening, or in the summer, or after? I mean,
Probably both. More when school wasn't in session.
And how long do you think that you were friends with him or hanging out with him, if you can recall?
Really, I think it was just a few months, because after he started getting weird about wanting to marry me and wanting to put me in a condo and give me this and that, I kind of got weirded out that he was asking those questions, because he'd never treated me like that. And so I took a friend that was living there and moved her into my mother's, and we stopped hanging out. And then soon after, that's when the FBI came to Hollywood and took me to Los Angeles.
And what did they say to you when you went in there?
They explained to me about who Roy and Larry were and what they had done, and wanted me to look at a bunch of pictures. And I called my mother first, and she came down there, and by the time she had come down, I had already looked at a bunch of pictures, and it freaked me out because there was a bunch of pictures of me, and I was at home, at school, at the park, friends. So it's like they stalked these, people.
So they were stalking you?
Yeah. But once my mom got there, she shut everything down. She didn't want me involved. I was a minor, and I really had nothing to say that would help them.
No, of course. I mean, how scary for you that they were stalking you and taking pictures of you when you didn't even know.
Roy did all that. I mean, my cats come up missing. Just weird things were happening around my house.
Do you think they did something to your cats?
I do.
I'll tell this actually, we were on the phone. I'll tell the acid bath story, Dina.
Okay.
So Dina and I were on the phone, and it was right after, he had grounded her because she didn't invite him to the birthday party. And Dina had said, 3 of my cats, mysteriously went missing. And I thought back to a couple of conversations BITTAKER and I had where he was testing out the chemicals that he had bought. Now, he was planning on burning out the eye sockets and the eardrums of the next victims he was going to use the chemicals on. Jan Mallon they squirted her with chemicals, trying to get her in the van, but she survived and testified. But I was asking him about the chemicals, and he said, well, I would acid bath cat. And when Dina said all her cats started going missing right after that, I started wondering if that could have been, if Larry was connected to that.
If he was stalking you and coming around your house at night and being creepy, who knows? Anything's possible.
Yeah, and anything is possible, or it's just crazy coincidence, like about Nick, Laura. Nick is my mom's ex-boyfriend, and they ended up writing to each other, and it's so strange because I had no idea, and this happened years ago.
Wait, who ended up writing to who?
Larry and my mom's ex-boyfriend, who's a writer, and they had letters about me that I didn't have, but Laura probably does.
Yeah, well, BITTAKER actually asked for bikini photos of Dina. Somehow obtained bikini photos of Dina in prison.
And he got them, you think, from your mom's ex-boyfriend?
Yeah.
He had to.
Dina, I'm so sorry. What a horrible thing to have happened to you as a teenager. So awful.
But I survived. I'm thankful. And I'm thankful for Laura. We're going to find those girls with y'all's help, and anyone else that wants to help us. I have no doubt. I have all the faith in the world.
So you think that he was carrying on a friendship with your mom's ex-boyfriend while he was in prison?
Oh, I know he was. Laura told me.
Yeah, he had mentioned the name to me, but it wasn't until after he died I realized it was Dina's mom's boyfriend. He had given me all the letters with all of his correspondence, and that's where I found him talking about Dina and her bikini shots. But it showed me how deep his infatuation and obsession with Dina went. Like, even in prison, he's obtaining photographs of her.
Do you think that's what stopped him from doing anything to her, because he was obsessed with her?
Yeah, I think it's very possible.
Dina, when is your birthday? What month?
November
In the beginning or the end?
17th.
Fellow Scorpio like myself.
Yeah. So there's not a whole lot of fear.
No, we don't have fear. I have literally sat in front of serial killers myself, and like Laura, like we just don't have fear. We're just like, I'm protected. You're not going to do anything to me.
Right. You're not touching me. Right. So you understand that part.
I do. So I was just trying to look at the timeline, because I think you hearing that tape must have been so horrifying for you without even
realizing that. Afterwards, when I found out, what he did and stuff, it just made me sick, literally.
When did you find out that it was the Gilliam tape? Did the police ever tell you?
No. They didn't tell me anything. I didn't know until whose tape it was. I just didn't want to hear it.
So when all this stuff about BITTAKER and Norris came out on the news, because when they got arrested, what did you think?
I honestly didn't think a whole lot. I didn't want anybody to even know I knew him. I didn't want nobody to know. I didn't talk about it to anybody. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. I didn't want anyone to know that I was involved in any of that. My name wasn't in anything because I was a minor, so I wanted to keep it like that.
Self-preservation, I understand that. That makes sense. Laura, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dina.
Go ahead.
No, finish what you were saying.
Now I don't care. So
yeah.
You remember a story of, be careful not to use too many names. I'll just use the first initial. He had told me this story about when S was they drove him up in the mountains and pulled the gun on him.
Yes.
Did he tell you that same story too?
No, he didn't. He never told me anything about him doing anything bad.
There's a lot of accounts from these teenagers of BITTAKER doing some really sick shit. I mean, one of the witnesses said that BITTAKER drove him up the mountains, didn't say a word to him, pulled a gun on him. And then, Dina is played the Gilliam tape, and she was just one of a couple of the girls who had heard it. And another one of the girls he played it for, she said he was sitting there smiling, playing with an ice pick. And that's how he killed Jackie. It was with an ice pick through the ear.
It's almost like he wanted to get their reaction, like he was going to get off on their reaction to what he had done so he could relive this. Gives him some sense of power. But by you saying, I don't want to hear it, turn it off, Dina, that's almost like taking the power back.
Yeah. I told him, I don't want to hear this shit. Turn it off. It sounds like you're hurting her. Doesn't sound like she's having sex. and he turned it off. He would basically do anything I asked him to do. I didn't ask much from him, but like with Roy, I told him I didn't want to be around him, and Roy wasn't around. It's just so weird to me. I don't understand it.
What do you think, Laura? What do you think, Laura? Why do you think he did that?
I said it's so fascinating to think, he really is taking orders from Dena. She said, shut it off. He shut it off right away. I don't want Roy around. Suddenly, Roy's not coming around as much. He's there. Essentially, yeah, you really took the power back from Bittaker. And I don't hear that with any other witness on the case. Everyone has told me, horrible experiences, and where he would never have taken an order from somebody, or he would have gotten furious at them. And then Dena's like just telling him, turn it off, don't bring Roy around. And he's just automatically doing it for her.
Right. Which makes me believe why she's alive.
I think that's what I've always thought, since I had no fear of him. And I had morals and beliefs, and I wasn't going to break them for him or anybody, no matter if I was there smoking with him or not. Just certain lines you don't cross.
And Laura, what did he say about Dena to you?
He would just talk about how much he liked her and she was so beautiful. If he was ever going to take a victim, it would have been Dena. Okay, so I had said, why would you have taken Dena? And his response was, she is beautiful. And I said, just because she's beautiful, he would have taken her. And he said, yes.
Did you ever ask him why he didn't take her?
Because, he knew her. So say Dena went missing, and then, all of her friends who are hanging at the motel would have been like, well, she was always with Larry. She last seen with Larry. So it would have been, directly connected to him.
I think it's interesting that he was having like all of these people come over to the motel. Like there's so many witnesses like that knew him. Like all these kids were hanging out with him and got to know him and had a relationship with him. Like he's the guy that bought us weed and alcohol. He wasn't thinking about if he got caught.
We didn't care when he was missing. We didn't care he was gone on the weekends. We had our own thing going on, and we didn't care. And that's, I think, his perfect place. A bunch of teenagers he hung out with, and then nobody cared where he went. We didn't give a shit. Go do whatever. We're going to do our thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
He had the perfect setup. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it was...
He got a lot of power, I think, from having all the teenagers and feeling like a big man. They all want to come over and smoke and drink. And I think he got off on that. And he didn't have a single friend growing up. Roy was pretty much his first friend. And now he's like this big man with all these people and teenagers hanging around the motel. And for the first time, I think he felt like he was somebody.
I agree with you. I think there's no other reason why a 38-year-old man would be hanging around with teenagers unless they wanted to feel that control and that power of like, do as I say, do what I say, you're banned, or I'm going to buy you alcohol, but then I'm not going to buy you alcohol, or whatever, to give them that sense of power. Well,
by no means taken up for him in any way, but I think Larry wanted to be loved. I'm not taking up for him by no means whatsoever, because he is a psychopathic killer, and I have no sorry for him. But I think he wanted to be loved and needed by someone.
I don't think he's ever felt love, I don't think he's ever felt love. Like from the mom abandoning him to the adopted parents, I don't think he's ever felt any type of sense of it.
But do you think, I understand what you're saying, Dena, that because you knew him in a different capacity. You didn't know he was doing these monstrous things. But evil is evil.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that even though he was abandoned and he was adopted by these other people who then abandoned him again, and I understand all of that, and it's tragic growing up in that kind of environment. But does that lead you to become this notorious, sadistic?
No, he had a choice in life, chose his road. I have no sympathy for the road he chose, because if that's the way you were looking for love, you were never going to find it, by being sadistic and evil.
That's the thing that's interesting to me. That's an interesting statement, Dena. Laura, do you think that by doing what he did, that's where he thought he was going to get love from?
It's the taking a girl captive. And, that's pretty much what Bittaker had wanted to do. If they had, a cabin or a trailer, they would have been held longer, but they would have always been killed. Once these girls are taken, they're going to be killed eventually. They would have held them longer. But with a lot of the serial killers, it's like, I think it stems from the abandonment. So they think if they can take a girl and they hold her hostage, they hold her captive, they hold her in a bunker, they hold her in a trailer, cabin, or whatever. To them, it's like their warped sense of feeling a type of love, and she can't leave. She's there and she's never leaving them. She can't leave them. She is their captive. And in their sick and twisted mind, that's the closest they get to feeling love from a captive. I I know it sounds sick, but this is how their minds are. This is how their minds work. And I've heard this from multiple different serial killers.
Well, that would be the only way that they could get someone to do what they wanted, if they were in control of them being captive, if they're putting them in a cage or putting them in. If someone joked about that, putting someone in a cage, like as a joke, if a guy said that, oh, I'd love to put her in a cage or something like that, what would you think of that, Laura? Would you think that that person potentially had this capability, or you think it would just be something?
I always hear this kind of stuff, like your mind always thinks it's a joke. Like the human mind doesn't think, oh, this person could be serious or real. They're really, going to do something like that. So when I hear like stories from like DENA and the teenagers, and Bittaker and Norris would joke about the chemicals, putting the chemicals into squirt guns and giving them to kids on the beach, and watching the kids squirt each other and everybody on the beach, and everybody being scarred for life. I mean, they would joke about this with the teenagers. And of course, you never think it's real, but like these guys are sitting there and they're being serious with these kids, and it's not really a joke for them. And just, oh, I'm going to put somebody in a cage. You would never think it's real. But yeah, if you're taking it as like a real comment, I mean, who puts somebody in a cage? I mean, who even has that idea or that fantasy to take someone and put them, in a cage so they have them to themselves?
Yeah. Well, DENA, thank you so much for talking with us today. Laura, do you want to have any other things you want to talk about that we haven't touched on?
We've really covered everything. DENA, is there anything that I forgot to ask or miss?
I think we've about covered everything.
Did he ever joke with you about stuff like that, DENA? Like what she's saying about the squirt gun? I mean, that's psychotic.
No. He let me shoot his guns at the motel, but I was the only one he let shoot them, the ones he hid under the refrigerator. But he never talked about anything ugly, psychotic, evil to me, because I guess after the audio, I wasn't going to put up with stuff like that. I guess he realized that. I don't know. It's a puzzle to me still why I'm still alive. But I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate Laura. We're ready to find those girls.
Thank you, DENA.
You're very welcome.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
On this season of Partners in True Crime, The Serial Killer Whisperer, we will be following Laura Brand's incredible journey as she continues her groundbreaking study on serial killers.
Each week, we will release never-before-heard recordings of her conversations with the most notorious killers in hopes to get answers for the victims' families, and maybe that could lead to recovering their lost remains.
Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and check out extra content from all of our podcasts. All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content.